This is Dr. Ron's Words of Wisdom, words on leadership, goal setting, productivity, and a whole lot more. I trust today this will be like a vitamin or a supplement for your mind and heart. And wherever you receive podcasts from, would you please subscribe to Dr. Ron's Words of Wisdom, leave a rating and a written review. It will enable others to be able to locate this podcast. Today I want to ask you a question, my friend. What is your story? Everyone has a story. Everyone you pass on the street, everyone who works where you work, everyone who lives in your neighborhood, and all neighborhoods of the world have a story. I love stories. And I'm not the only person. The several billion others who live on this planet love a story. We tell our stories to inform ourselves and to help in the transformation of our lives, of trying to make sense out of all of the experiences. We want to learn about our history and our family, and we want to tell about our experiences, that they were more than just a random happening. But we also at times have had certain kinds of experiences that by telling our story we can transcend it. Our stories make a difference not only in our life, but in our world. It helps to broaden our perspective, not only as I tell my story, but especially as I listen to your story. It broadens my perspective. It helps me to see farther than I would have had I not heard your story. It helps me to take courageous action by listening to your story. I may have been imprisoned or enslaved by bad thinking or bad parts to my story. And in my story, there are spiritual components of transformation that has changed everything. So telling your story is just a natural part of living. It's a wonderful deposit that you can leave by passing your heritage, your family, and your family story, but don't ignore your own story. There are lots of reasons why, as leaders and as persons, we need to tell stories. Your life story will help to protect your memories. I was raised by a grandmother who was blind. And still to this day, she remains, in my opinion, one of the greatest storytellers. She could tell a story, and as a child and even a teenager, kept me on the edge of my seat. And I would listen to her describe her life, her family, her coming to faith, how she overcame several tragedies in her life. And by her telling it and passing her story on, it protected those memories. There have been so many times over the intervening years since she has passed on that I wished I could talk to her one more time. There was a piece of information that I wasn't just totally clear on, and I would have given nearly anything I have if I could have spent a couple of more hours of talking and listening to her story. Be a memory keeper. Now, we all seemingly don't need anyone to tell us to hold on to the negative, but there are some good stories in your life. And a lot of the good stories started out bad, but something amazing happened that transformed it. Don't throw those memories away. Another reason you need to tell your story is not only for your own good and your own encouragement and your own sort of finding who you are and where you've been, but it'll benefit others. When you provide the kind of information that's contained in your story, it helps us to see things we would never have seen before. There's always an inspirational quality to everyone's stories. And I learn something. I learn something key when I listen to your story. Your story defines who you are, where you've come from, who has helped you in ways they didn't realize they were helping you. It helps you to get a sense about who am I, what am I about, what really matters to me. And have you ever asked yourself recently, how do you want to be remembered when you're no longer here? You know, when we pass away, our life gets abbreviated down to just a very brief paragraph or two of a eulogy. Perhaps if it's still in the newspaper in the community you live in, perhaps a one-column newspaper obituary that will be written by a well-written relative. What would you want them to say? What do you want to be remembered for? Well, start telling your story. My grandmother has been gone 36 years. Hardly a day goes by that I don't still think about her. And I don't fondly remember some of her words of wisdom and some of her stories. And even though she's no longer here, she is a part of my legacy. Another reason to tell your story is it'll increase your self-acceptance. There are some painful, for most of us, there are some painful chapters in the story of our life. And it would be so easy to gloss over it. It would be so easy to cut and paste it out of our lives. But it's there. And if you can't change it, you give it to God and you accept it. And you learn from it. I have found that if you allow yourself to tell the story, just the telling of your story seems to reduce the anxiety and the tension. Everyone has had a dark, difficult chapter or two or three in their life. And it helps getting that story out. As I've looked back over my life, there were times when I thought someone really did something to me. This event was done against me. And now with the value of time and a joyous faith, I can say most of the things that I used to think were done to me have in essence been done for me. They've made me a better person. They've made me a more sensitive person. They've made me a more empathetic person. Hopefully a more gracious person. Now, it's your choice. You can turn that over, and the things that have happened in your life, you can say, well, I'll never get to the place, Dr. Ron, where I can say that happened for my benefit. I'm not saying it was good, and I am not for one moment depreciating the pain and the hurt. But my guess is you have learned some invaluable lessons. One thing that I notice when I hear somebody's story, I almost go into an automatic positive feeling about that person. When someone is vulnerable enough with me to tell me their story, it creates an atmosphere charged with empathy. As they tell the story, sometimes with great emotion, sometimes just matter of fact, but when you hear and you see what they've gone through and what they've overcome, it gives you a deep-seated appreciation and a positive view of that person. Stories connect. Most of you have figured out that I've spent many years of my adult life being a pastor. I'm into some other kind of ministry now, but I used to preach weekly, probably very weekly, but every week I preached. And I noticed over the years when people will comment on a sermon, very rarely is it my content or how wise it was. They remember the stories. It was the stories that connected. Stories are like picture windows to a person's soul. And therefore, people feel connected to you, especially by the glue of the stories you tell. It helps us at times to reconnect with some things we haven't thought about for a while. There are some listening today. One of the reasons you really need to tell someone your story is you probably need to heal from a chapter of your history. Something went wrong. You lost a child. You had a spouse leave you. Accidents that have happened, jobs that you've lost, illnesses that you've contracted, um, business dealings that went south, and you're hurting. Perhaps one of the greatest healings that can take place is for you to start telling your story. And it will help others, there's no question about it, but the person it may help most is you. Now, I want to just step aside and ask this question. You're thinking, what does this have to do with leadership, goal setting, and productivity? Leader, maybe one of the greatest connecting things you can do, one of the most empowering things you can do in the workplace is to begin to tell your story. You be vulnerable. And they won't just see you as the boss. They'll begin to see you as a flesh and blood person who has real problems like everyone else does. And they will feel a connection with you and to you. When you begin to tell a story as a leader, it helps keep us grounded. There are times that people come into our lives and they've only known us in this phase of our lives, and they think we've always been this leader, we've always been the boss, we've always been in charge, we've always been an entrepreneur, and they don't know that we were the kid that was sent to the office, the person abandoned by a loved one, the person who overcame a debilitating disease. It'll keep you grounded to know, hey, I wasn't born with this success situation in mind. I've gotten here because of my story. And as you tell your story, you'll begin to discover there are hidden gems all throughout your life that need to be mined. You need to get in there and mine them. And you'll see the deeper meanings and purposes as today you begin to tell your story. You see, you'll begin to feel more positive about who you are, where you are, and more importantly, where you're headed. Knowing your story and listening to the stories of others really does expand your view of other people. I can't tell you how many times in my life a particular person who was sort of rubbed me the wrong way or irritated me or I didn't think were quite measuring up, when we got into a position where they shared their story, my eyes opened and I began to see them as someone different than I, up to that point, had imagined them. It helped me to feel more connected. It's how you develop empathy when you hear someone's story. Someone who shares a story with you, you almost cannot help but feeling closer to them. Most of us who have friends that we're very close to, it is our mutual stories that bind our hearts together and keep that relationship close. In the community, your tribe, your business, your family, your structures in life. This is how you all hang together and grow together, is in the sharing of your story. I'm wondering what would happen in the next staff meeting if you just said, I want everyone, even though we know each other and we've worked together, I want everyone to go around the table and in 5 to 8 minutes, tell us your story. Where are you from? What happened? What setbacks have you overcome? What do you think we need to know about you? I'm believing it may become one of the most productive staff meetings you have ever had, because you'll begin to see each other as human beings, not as bosses and employees or widgets, or just some part of the machinery. These are flesh and blood people who cry, who have aspirations, and have overcome a whole lot. I ask you again, my leadership friend, what is your story? Don't pass it off. Why don't you take some time within the next couple of days and write out your story? Something has happened in and through you that would be beneficial. It would be helpful for all of us to hear it. And those who tell their story also need to practice listening to the stories of others. You've been listening to Dr. Ron's Words of Wisdom. Words on leadership, goal setting, productivity, and a whole lot more. I trust today this has been like a vitamin or supplement for your mind and heart. And wherever you receive podcasts, would you please subscribe to Dr. Ron's Words of Wisdom, leave a rating and a brief written review. My leadership friend, you are a story, you have a story, and we want to hear it. If no one else wants to hear your story, I want to hear it. And remember, my leadership friend, you are doing better than you think you are. You really are. And until next time, this is Dr. Ron saying, have a great and blessed day.